I think we'll get started in a minute here. Dan, are you just about ready?
I sure am.
Wonderful. All right, so I wanted to provide a especially warm scholastic welcome to Dan SaSuWeh Jones. Dan is a filmmaker who's produced work for Sesame Street, NBC, TBS, and other networks. He worked as a consultant and Imagineer for Walt Disney's Disney America theme park, and is a bronze sculptor as well. If you haven't seen his work, you should definitely go look up photos because they are truly amazing pieces. He was a finalist in the competition for the American Indian Veterans Memorial at the National Museum of the American Indian on the Washington, D.C. Mall. And he was a storytelling author and consultant for National Geographic Encyclopedia of the American Indian. And now he is bringing his talents, storytelling skills, and writerly cred to our scholastic list with Living Ghosts and Mischievous Monsters. So Dan is going to give a brief talk about his work, and then we're going to do a Q&A. So feel free to write your questions in the chat. I will be moderating that, so I'll share them with him when we get to that portion of things. Dan, the floor is yours.
Oh, what an honor to be here. I certainly want to thank SLJ for the opportunity, and I have to recognize my relatives that are here as well, my tribal relatives. I am Daniel SaSuWeh Jones of the Ponca Nation of Oklahoma, and I'm the scholastic author of Living Ghosts and Mischievous Monsters, Chilling American Indian Stories. This concept of the book actually came from travels that I took across after university. I decided to just see what was out there. So I started from Southwest, moved to the West Coast and various points between, through Canada, ended up on the East and down into Florida, and spent a lot of time with a lot of different tribes. And from that, there was a striking theme that kept reoccurring. And that was just how many ghost stories that were being shared and there was being utilized by these tribes. After studying quite a bit, ghost and spiritual stories can be very useful for the spiritual people to control sacred things. But also there's a real belief, and whether that belief creates these things or whether these things were here and have been here long before us is a question I don't think many people have an answer for. But out of these striking themes, I think we've been able to kind of break them down into ghosts, monsters, witches, spirits, and the supernatural. And American Indians, certainly in all of the places and tribal governments that I visited, tribal individuals have distinct differences in how they believe in each of these various categories. A spirit is not necessarily a ghost, in other words. But just in the overall belief of the supernatural, and some of the work that I was doing, I was writing, but I was also doing some film work in my travels. And one of the contracts that I got was for the Institute of American Indian Arts out of Santa Fe. And it happened to be 500 years, kind of dating it now, but after Columbus arrived in America. And the Institute of American Indian Arts sent a film crew, which I was fortunate enough to be one of them, to all points around the United States. And with one basic question was, how are tribes doing 500 years after Columbus? How are we doing today? And there was one place that we went. When we went, we would usually generally meet the tribal government. It would be arranged by the Institute. The Institute is set up by the Congress of the United States, so they have a lot of very respected institution amongst American Indians. So we would have access to, the elders that we were seeking, and the ones that certainly were the most credible and wise, I should say. When we reached a place called Fort Duchesne, Utah, many spiritual stories come from that area. They brought in a little gentleman out of mountains, stark black and silver hair, wore braids like mine. And we asked him the question, you know, how are you doing 500 years after Columbus as a people? And he started this conversation by saying, it really doesn't matter. He said, what was Columbus? Was he looking for something, or had he found something? He said, what really matters is what you find, and which each of us find in ourselves, that inner peace that we need to find that in whatever world we're coming from. And world we're coming from, I kind of sparked my attention. I said, you spoke of other worlds? And he said, our lives are like being in a home. Each room has many windows and several rooms in the house. Normally we see out the windows, we see what we perceive as, you know, the country around us, the land around us. He said, but what really is happening in the spiritual world is our world is like we are in this room, and in each window that surrounds us, there's a different world, and these worlds are passing by one another. He says, we're only here for a short time, so it's not the matter of time. It hasn't matter anything to do with the 500 years. It's about the peace we find when we're here. And I think after this gentleman said that, my interest in the supernatural really took off. I had to find, you know, these other worlds. What was he really talking about, and what was in them? So I think ghost stories are told throughout the world. And really what makes our stories, our ghost stories, unique is the culture itself, that it's dealing with every aspect of our culture, but you're dealing in tribal customs, games that we play, and we mentioned a few of these. The settings are Native American settings, the tribes that it comes from, we're very documented that very well. Certainly, in some instances, the languages that you use, you see there's governments, there's different ways of doing things. And what really should bring us together as people is how we do different things, how we do everything, the same things differently. But it seems that that's the thing that separates us the most. But I think what you'll see is not just the diversity in tribes, but in how diverse we are from one another. And I think one of the most exciting things in my book are the stories that are all told by American Indians ourselves. So of the mainstream stories you hear of Native American ghosts and monsters, there's a few that have really entered the mainstream. Sasquatch, of course, Owl Witch, which would be more like the Mothman in this culture's view, or how it's labeled. La Llorona is another Indian stories, and some of these are very old. And we tried to do that. We tried to mix the old with the new. There's a lot of our creatures, monsters, ghosts that are just now coming into the limelight and are coming into view, being seen. Skinwalkers is a big deal now. People are trying to understand what that is. Deer woman, orbs, things that we've talked about for a long time. But the vast number of American Indian ghosts, legends, monsters have yet to come out of behind our scene, or to come from the American Indians themselves. And there's several problems that you run into with this, that in many of these cultures, it's very strong with them, but a lot of these stories are forbidden. It's forbidden for them to talk about it unless under certain situations or certain people have the right to actually talk or tell these stories. They're actually forbidden. So we were very careful, we were very respectful of that. But I think that the stories we have compiled together and that I've told should be very, very interesting. I hope you enjoy the book.
Thank you so much, Dan. That's an amazing encapsulation of all the wonderful things that are in this book. I think, you know, the only way to really experience what the book provides is to read it. There are worlds. You know, you were talking about the fact that we are in a home, and each room has many windows, and you've given us a view onto those other rooms, those other worlds that are flying by. So thank you. Thank you for that. I wanted to remind folks that we have a Q&A portion coming up. So if you have any questions, you can send them directly to me, or you can put them into the chat directly. Or you can find out what questions I want to ask Dan, and I have a few prepared that I know I want to find answers to. But in the meantime, while we're getting ready for that, Dan is going to do a brief reading.
Thank you for the opportunity. This is from the opening of my book. The hour is late, the night is long, it is cold, the trail is long, and it is old. Stories kept and stories lost. Once you read a story that filled you with hope, and read one that filled you with loss. But it was that one about ghosts that you remember the most. Who are they, and where have they come? Are they as us old? Are they as old as us? Are they as wise? Are they even the same? Are they the truth, or are they a lie? Why is it that the one about ghosts we remember the most? Sleep this night and many more until you grow old and wise. Forget those stories of fairies, gremlins, and trolls. Close your eyes and sleep tonight. All is filled with hope. Fear of loss is far away, but the story of ghosts you will fear the most.
That was great, Dan. And we did have, and that's the, I think I don't remember if you mentioned this. That's the inscription for the book. So make sure to check that out. We did have a question come in. Julia Nash, thank you. Julia asks, how long were you researching and traveling for these stories?
5 years is, but I was doing other things on top of that. I was doing several projects. So I would say the actual work on the book was about a year of compiling and putting together. My travels were certainly related. That's where these came from. But as to concentrate on the book, would say a little over a year. Could be closer to 2, but it was right around there.
And I can imagine that in reality, this is a book you've sort of been preparing for a long time. I imagine you're taking elements from all different aspects of your life.
Yeah, I am, and we did keep those traditional stories within the culture that they come from. But the stories that I tell myself are modern. In other words, there's modern day stories here, and then there's traditional stories. And some of them, the modern stories, of course, for me, they've come from my experiences on that trip. So it's really hard to know exactly. I was out in the tribal world for 5 years, traveling to other tribes, but I was just sitting down and compiling the book. It was under 2 years, about a year apart, sure.
Yeah, that's great. And I think something that you said is really important as well. You mentioned there are modern stories in here too. These are living ghosts.
The cultural dynamics is very, very important. It's generally the youth that keep that alive. But what we find in cultural dynamics is if a culture doesn't change, it's generally the youth who will get tired of it and leave. So for them to really be involved into the culture, it's those, they'll bring their own changes when it's time for those changes to happen. And they generally reflect. Now you can see Coyote stories, for instance, where he's using the subway. And because that's the reality of many urban Indians today, is, Coyote is no longer in the woods running around. He's on the subways, traveling around with us today. So that cultural dynamic, is just a natural progression in cultural change.
I love that. Thank you. Thank you for that expansion. I have a question in from Olivia. did you have a favorite visit from your travels?
No, they were all very, very special. I did meet some people that made lifetime friendships with that one that I quote is Tiny Man Heavy Runner. He's since passed, but it was his grandparents who were raised him, and they were Blackfeet medicine people. And they Alfred Wells and Agnes Wells was his wife. They didn't speak a lick of English, and I had to, over a period of over a year, I had to get used to, learn as much Blackfeet as I could, which is very little, but I would mainly communicate to their son, Tiny Man, who was becoming a medicine person himself, but he's a very famous person in the Indian world, which is another world here. No, I don't know. The Crown of the Rockies, we take horseback and go back into Bob Marshall Wilderness, Glacier National Park. These are some of the most beautiful mountains on Earth, on planet Earth. They do call it the Crown of the Rockies, and it's magnificent waterfalls, pure lakes. And so, it's hard to say. Or, Zion, being down and spend the time that I spent in Zion in the Grand Canyon National Parks, or even in the Haudenosaunee country up in New York. It's, they all had their very special places. And it'd be too hard for me to say that one was more special than the other.
I think that's fair. A journey like this, you're encapsulating so much, and it's a book that feels very, very exciting and very achievable, especially for readers who are looking for something a little different, something really engaging. But I can imagine that every single experience you had was its own gemstone in a way.
Yeah.
Was there anything unexpected about anything that surprised you in your journey?
I think that I had to look at it from my own culture. And I think the things that I found out was about different cultures that had either been, my tribe had been removed from our homelands, and that had happened on the removal era of American Indian affairs. But so we lost a connection with a lot of the places where our mythical past, was. They're still there in the Black Hills, but we're not there. We've been separated. And I think that's one of the more painful and hard to culturalize, to get used to, is to be removed from these, because it's these base stories that really tell you who you are as a people. That mythology, that tribal mythology, there's where you learn all of these characters that are involved. And when you learn that Rabbit, where he committed these things, those people were able to say, this is where that happened. And we've lost that because we were removed, of course. But I think that's one thing that I learned from my travels, that it hurt a great deal, but I was still, amazed that is a real thing here in America. We have people that have been here so long, my people included, but have been on the actual land that they believe they were created on, that they walked out of the earth from this land here, from this spot. And that in many places took me and showed me this is where we were created. So I missed, but I really enjoyed that. Really put a lot together for me in understanding, culture.
That's amazing. And yeah, that sounds like it was a formative collective experience.
I hope I answered that. Yeah.
You did, yeah. That was a not where I was expecting that to go, frankly, but an expansive answer that really encompasses a great deal about what this book is and what it helps us to achieve, and the knowledge that it provides us. So thank you always for this book, but also for that answer. I'm going to move on to a question that came in from Sabrina. How closely did you get to work with the illustrator, Weishayat Alvitra. And do you foresee another book in this same vein? Do you see yourself writing another book in this vein with more American Indian stories?
Well, first of all, Wishoya was just wonderful to work with. And she's so smart. You don't have to say much to her twice, for sure. We because of the pandemic, was involved in the whole last year that we were working, and certainly the whole time that I had started before the pandemic, but when she came on was actually during the pandemic. We did it all by weekly phone calls. We would go over each section, and basically she would read the story, and then she came up with the illustration, and I was happy. I can't remember, maybe a couple of times that I would say, well, this is probably more culturally correct, or she would ask me, can you send me some some of the tools and that they were working with, or what you were looking at, and for the illustration. So but she was just wonderful with Shoya. Let's see, that was the first part of the question. The second part was,
the second part was, do you foresee another book in this same vein?
Right. Yeah, we're negotiating. I guess we'll see how this one does, if this takes off well and people do it. Yeah, there's these 32 stories and not even scratching the surface. That's all the room we have, but it's definitely not even scratching the surface. Like I said, there's of the monsters and ghosts that are known in the mainstream society, there's dozens more that are not known at all. And basically we just focused on this book as the stories that you could relate to, and the ones you might know, Bigfoot and other stories that are just now coming, skinwalkers, and coming into being.
Yeah, it sounds like there's a universe of stories.
There really is, yeah, a world of stories.
Yeah, and I know that our librarian friends are so passionate about connecting readers with these kind of stories, with stories that are going to be really engaging and illuminating and exciting. So I'm excited. I wanted to, since I have the book here, I wanted to show an example of the artwork. I think this is just sketches because this is the advanced copy of the book, but it really is just stunning artwork. Just some samples. Dan, we have about 3 minutes left. So I actually, inspired by your reading the poem, I wanted to ask you, why is it that the one about ghosts we remember the most? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, fear is certainly one of the strongest emotions that we have, next to love. And I guess fear and love are right side by side with that. And as I had said earlier, that, ghosts are very, they're handy for parents, for instance, to keeping their kids in line, especially when, children are raised up maybe in wilderness areas, such as the American Indians did. You don't go out there because, not because there's a vicious animal, that a grizzly bear might carry you away or something like that. It's got to be even more scarier than that. So anyway, ghost comes about because they're useful to control people, basically. And that happens to us, and every culture does it from the youngest of age, that ghost stories are used to control them. But the other reason is because they're living, they're real.
That's great. I mean, I think people are going to be really, really interested to see all the different representations in this book, and it'll help illuminate some of what we're talking about here. With 1 minute to go, is there anything else you want to leave us with? Anything that you're hoping this book will provide to readers? Anything you hope they take away?
Well, I just think the diversity of culture, how we all do the same things differently. We all do the same things differently. And really, that should be the thing that unites us. We all dance, but we all have different types of dances. And those should be, we all eat food, but we all have different types of foods. Those are really should be what we need to be teaching our children, is those are the things that we should admire amongst one another and not divide us.
I love that. That's a perfect note to end on. Thank you so much, Dan, for being here. And thank you everybody for attending. Have a great rest of your day.
I see. Thank you here. Thank you all for being here very much. Thank you.